Common wisdom suggests that without limitation, innovative and creative thinking will thrive. The removal of obstacles, hindrances, and other impediments to free thought halt the creative process. However, Return of the Obra Dinn represents a counter-argument to this common wisdom. With limitation, creators are guided to innovation. They must push boundaries and excel within a structure that leads to the creation of something truly original. A study undertaken by the Harvard Business Review analysed 145 empirical studies on the effect that constraints have on innovation. Their results showed that, contrary to this common wisdom, constraints benefit creativity. It is only when constraints become excessive that this is problematic. In this episode of Worth Discussing, I will argue that Return of the Obra Dinn sits within this Goldilocks zone of healthy constraints, and by virtue of this excels in its detective genre. Obra Dinn takes place in 1802, and the player is tasked with discovering the fate of the missing crew of the titular ship, an East Indian trade vessel. The player takes on the role of an insurance inspector, provided with a watch that can reverse time and a ship manifest given to you by one of the ship's few survivors. The player must fill this in with crew members' fates and names in order to complete the game. Throughout the game, the player will see a number of freeze frames as well as limited dialogue, and they must use all of this to uncover the crew's fate. Obra Dinn immediately stands out due to its odd stylistic choice of any of a variety of 80s computer screens. I recently played the game on my Nintendo Switch and can safely say that it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Obra Dinn is, to me, the first game to truly capture the feeling of Holmesian-like problem solving, and this obscure and deliberately unassistive experience is so wonderful because through its various limitations it breeds innovation. Although commonly confused, largely due to the Sherlock Holmes canon, deductive reasoning is not the means by which the famous detective solved mysteries. In Obra Dinn, like Holmes, the players will be engaged with inductive reasoning, which takes the path of observation, pattern recognition, hypothesis, and finally, theory. Using this means, players will observe a scene, note a pattern that converges with the limited information the game has provided them. They will create a hypothesis as to the victim, perpetrator, and cause of death, and finally, they will test this theory in-game through the ship's manifest. Due to the very limited information the player has, deductive reasoning is nigh on impossible, as there will always be room for doubt. Because of this, there exists the necessity for the game's triple validation system. This system gives the player a solid and obligatory game-like notification of 3 successful fates predicted and victims predicted. On top of this, it creates a continuous source of pleasure through those little eureka moments and allows for the player to capably uncover the whole crew's identity. Even with this generous system, many failed or seriously struggled, myself included, to fill the ship's manifest. Although some argue that the possibility to abuse the game's triple validation system should be considered a negative, I feel that this system ensures that the game is actually capable of completion and is likely encouraged by the game through its provision of the guessability system, where images of characters are ranked on the basis of, you guessed it, their ability to be induced. The design of Obra Dinn, inspired by 1-bit games on computers like the original Macintosh, was a convenient niche for the game's creator, Lucas Pope. Aside from making him stand out from his competitors, Pope was solidly aware that as a lone game designer, he could never compete with the high-end, realistic graphics of games that are produced at modern AA and AAA levels. This decision has had a particular impact on the game, in that every image displayed in the game is effectively a manifestation of the Chekhov's gun principle in film. The concept states that, if, in the first act, you have hung a pistol on the wall, then in the following one it should be fired. Otherwise, do not put it there. Obra Dinn implements this by, for the most part, only placing information in the game that will assist the player in determining the facts of a scene. In visuals, the game merely provides freeze frames of how the action occurred, and there is typically a good degree of spacing between each freeze frame so as to not amount to a cohesive image. This ensures that individual elements still require piecing together. In convergence with this, graphical fidelity is kept to a bare minimum, and as such, detail significance may be difficult to determine, which ensures players must pay particular attention to detail, should they desire to discover the identities of the various passengers. Chekhov's principle is also translated to the game's ship manifest, which is limited excellently so that very often every tool at the player's disposal must be used to uncover a crew member's identity. Its design is streamlined so cleverly that each page maintains the same 4 boxes of information, which ensures that there are no distractions from your detective mission. Details in the manifest, as small as the distinguishment between a seaman and a topman, would, in many other games, be irrelevant, but here, knowing that difference can be the determining factor of whether the player uncovers the next mystery. Every piece of information provided is required, and the game is, in a word, deliberate. As a final example, this can be seen through the limited amount of dialogue which forces the player to contemplate nearly every uttered word, as it could hide within it some clear clue or an obscure one that will only become paramount later down the line. Examples of this are numerous, and players will very commonly discover a crew member's fate very quickly, but will not uncover their identity for multiple scenes. Because of this, it is also to the game's benefit that the experience is rather condensed, so that players can retain the wealth of information expected of them. And I would suggest that if you can and plan to play Obra Dinn, you should beat the game in as short a time span as possible. Had the game been developed to a more realistic standard, additional items and clutter would have been required for that realistic effect, yet this would have made detective work more difficult and thus taken away from the deliberateness of Obra Dinn's design. It is therefore because information is limited that players are encouraged to pay more attention, and it is here where the game innovates through its all facts and no filler approach, which is incredibly objective in the way that it portrays information, as the player is left to assess facts entirely of their own volition when determining what has occurred in a given scene. This type of design, particularly in detective games, is so unusual, as instead of holding the player's hand and guiding them to the next objective, the game provides a level of autonomy that places faith in the player's intelligence to uncover the mystery of the Obra Dinn. Realism in games does not always need to be the aim. The presentation of information in a deliberate, limited, and innovative way is the strongest means by which a detective narrative can succeed. This can be manifested in numerous ways, whether it be sound, art, or game design. A thematic and cohesive approach, analogous to the one taken in Obra Dinn, is an incredibly interesting, but more importantly, genre-appropriate method for a successful game. The game's user-friendly UI and gameplay mechanics, such as the consistent layout of the ship manifest, ensure there are no distractions from your singular aim, discovering the fate of the good Obra Dinn. It is therefore safe to say that Return of the Obra Dinn has been worth discussing, as it laughs in the face of the common wisdom earlier discussed, because it innovates by virtue of its limitations. It is merely a shame that it took so long for games to reach this standard, and I hope that in the future detective games of the same ilk of Obra Dinn will be inspired by this approach. Thank you for watching my second video. I had planned to make this video about The Witcher 3's port to Nintendo Switch. However, I wanted to get this video out first, and the Witcher video will be coming soon. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more videos just like it, please subscribe to my channel for videos in the Worth Discussing series and new series that I have planned for the future. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank my patrons, whose support is deeply appreciated. Thank you again for watching, and I hope to see your feedback in the comments below. And until next time, goodbye.